Okay, well, my name is Jack, and yeah.
My name's Nina. We're first year students here at DNS, and we're both from the UK.
Yeah, and basically, yeah, we just got back 2 months ago. We got back from a 4-month study travel. It was we went by bus to Denmark to Guinea-Bissau when we were doing investigations and stuff on this travel. And now we're in this period called Bring It to the Public, which basically means we've been doing like presentations and posting things online. It's been adapted a bit for the coronavirus, of course. And yeah, this is kind of also part of our studies in order to give a presentation about some of the things we've learned. So yeah. Yeah, you want to say a bit about
the introduction? Okay, so we decided that we wanted to do this course for you guys about the resource curse, and maybe you've read in the description that you were sent, so you have some idea of what it is. We're not sure kind of at what level you're at, so we're gonna go quite slowly and go through it. And then at the end, we will have a discussion, so we will split off into breakout groups, have some discussion for you guys, and then we'll come back together at the end and share some of the discussions that have taken place. Eustace said that maybe you were sent, there's some rules that you should stay on mute when you're not speaking, just to kind of avoid the background noise, and it would be great to have you all on video to be able to kind of participate a bit more. Yeah, and we're recording.
Yeah, so I will just go straight into it. First, I just want to explain basically what are natural resources and what the resources are that we're going to talk about. And yeah, basically it's things that exist freely in nature, and they can be renewable and non-renewable. So renewable resources is, plants and animals, livestock, fish, and then non-renewable is your minerals and metals like iron, gold, diamonds, and then we have fossil fuels as well, like oil and gas. And yeah, what we're going to be focusing on is mainly the fossil fuels. We'll talk about a little bit about fish in Mauritania, which is one of the countries that we traveled to. Yeah, and a little bit about the minerals and metals. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's what natural resources are. But we wanted to talk a little bit about the resource curse and this idea. And I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it before, but it's a term that kind of came about and is otherwise known as the paradox of plenty. And it's basically the idea that these countries with an abundance of natural resources tend to have less economic growth, less democracy, worse development outcomes than countries with fewer resources. And the kind of idea about why this is, is one of the things that we're going to be talking about during this course. So yeah, what is the resource curse? And it's kind of the way in which these countries have come about after having so many resources, and so lots of them face, and there's lots of corruption because the resources act as a big incentive of what people would like to trade like this, and so it's an easy resource for revenue and for making money, and so there's lots of competition between people, and so corruption is kind of quite big in lots of the countries that are rich in resources, because it's this competition. And yeah, I don't know if this is, I'm not very so yeah, there's for example, as well as corruption, this inequality is growing massively. Like in Angola is an example of an incredibly oil-rich country, and has one of the world's largest growth rates, but still its human development index is just 0.49, and its infant mortality rate is like way above even the sub-Saharan African average. And so this kind of imbalance in the country between some people getting incredibly rich and some people still living in these conditions and aren't really benefiting from the richness of their country. In lots of the countries that do face the resource curse, there's also poor governance, and it kind of goes with this less democracy. And 23 countries in the world, they get at least 60% of their export from oil and gas, and none of them are real democracies. They're kind of these interesting political systems that kind of are very much ruled by this money and this oil and power. And yeah, so because of the resources as well, and there's wealth that comes with these resources, it enables rebel groups to kind of finance themselves and become very strong. And so they've got this very strong opposition from people against the governments that aren't able to control them in some ways. Not in all countries, of course, what we're talking about, but yeah, corruption, extortion, and poor governance kind of lead to this rebellion, and so there's this big backlash. And another big thing that comes with the resource curse is a lack of transparency, and a lack of transparency in terms of the kind of amounts of exports that are being made and the amounts of money that is being made by lots of these countries. And so there's some examples of like smuggling, illegal workers, and arms dealings that kind of come about in lots of these countries because of the natural resources, and because people want to make the money, and like there's more of an incentive to kind of create these rebel groups and create these other groups, because yeah. So an example, a very strong example that is often spoken about when you talk about the resource curse and about natural resources is the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it has an incredibly volatile kind of history, and it's involved in so many different kind of wars, and there's lots of conflict going on in the country for lots and lots of its history. And yeah, it kind of it's spoken about as having this war that's one of the biggest world wars that Africa has been housed of. And the kind of greed for political power and wealth kind of fuels the exploitation of the people in the Congo. And the resources and the land kind of are also incredibly exploited because of this greed for power. The institutions are not transparent, and so there's kind of very little ability to manage the actions and manage the exports. And I read when I was doing a little bit of research that hundreds of millions of US dollars in infrastructure loans that came from the Chinese government are going missing in the Democratic Republic of Congo, because it's just not got this clear overview, and like it's not delivering it in the same way. I think it is changing a little bit more recently, but that's because other powers have seen these bigger issues and are kind of trying to step in and change it. But yeah, the Democratic Republic of Congo, it has a weak democracy, and it allows corrupt politicians to maintain power. And it's an interesting country because it's such a large country with so many different resources. And one specific one that is increasingly becoming incredibly sought after is coltan. And I don't know if you've heard of coltan, but you all definitely use it because it's in gadgets. It's in microchips of like mobile phones and laptops and things like this. And so this overseas need for coltan like haunts the country at the moment because there's this need for it, and it's one of the few places where you're able to mine it. Yeah. And I want to say one last thing about the resource curse, if you want. Which is that it creates stunted long-term economic growth for like a nation that in theory should be very fortunate and very rich. Yeah. I think I spoke too fast. Sorry.
Yeah, and then and then we want to talk a bit about kind of who is to blame for the resource curse, or not to blame, but what is the reason that it's kind of there. What are the kind of history, the companies, the people who are kind of causing it to happen. Yeah, and the first one is kind of colonialism, and now more recently neo-colonialism. It's Nina again. Or
yeah, I'll try to go slower. So yeah, from colonization and when lots of the European countries first found these rich soils of Africa, which is what we're going to talk about the colonization of Africa more, because we learned about it on our study travel, so I feel that I'm a bit more able to speak about this subject. But I'm sure that if you were super interested, like you could research online and there'd be so many more examples. But we discovered that the trade of materials was incredibly important and incredibly essential in the colonization of these countries, because the European powers wanted raw materials, wanted these natural resources for industry, for development, for production. And so they found this basically gold mine of opportunity and gold mine of resources which they could tap into on the African continent. And as such, they implemented themselves in these countries and were able to access this raw material and these natural resources very easily. And going on to this, like the colonizers, realized the potential that these countries held, and they were acquiring this raw material. And then as independence came about, they didn't really want to lose this access to these resources. And so they kind of established trading partnerships and agreements with their ex-colonies where they were still kind of able to access lots of these raw materials because they knew they were there, and they wanted to have this connection with them in this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I will talk about private companies, and this is basically most of the natural resources in all over the globe. They're mostly extracted and used by private companies as opposed to the state, the government. And these companies are like very, very profit orientated, obviously, and for that reason they exploit the land and also the people for these resources. And they have huge influences on governments because a huge amount of the revenue that a government gets in particular countries, especially, I'm talking particularly about sub-Saharan Africa at the moment, or African countries as a whole. Not as a whole, like African countries with a lot of natural resources, because this is what we know most about. And yeah, the private companies, the natural resources, they're a huge amount of income for the countries. So the private companies have a lot of influence on the governments, and they kind of assist in keeping corrupt governments there in many cases, especially companies like Shell, ExxonMobil. They take a lot of the profit for themselves, and then the people who live around those resources don't get much from the resources themselves. And it's actually the case that many oil companies have revenues several times higher than the countries that they actually extract from. And yeah, a lot of these companies are like European, more and more from Asia, USA. There's a few from African countries, but it's mostly European, American, Asian. And also I wanted to talk about, did I get rid of it?
No, I think we're still there.
Sorry, I also wanted to talk about China, because China is not, China has companies, but they are state owned. And they also have, they trade a lot with African nations, the nations we went to, Mauritania, Senegal. They trade a lot with them. They take a lot of the natural resources, but they also invest heavily in infrastructure. And we witnessed it in Senegal, in particular, in roads and hospitals, cultural places, internet, TV. And it's something that private companies don't necessarily do. And I think the difference is that, yeah, private companies, the interest is profit. Whereas with China, as it's state-owned companies, and this is just from my understanding, they have more of a kind of interest in these nations as like business partners as a whole, and they see investment opportunities. Yes, they want to gain the natural resources, but they also want to gain a good trading partner. They want a place where Chinese nationals can live and work and do business as well. And yeah, it's interesting. I'm not saying that China is only a positive influence. They also exploit the countries, and they also take a lot of natural resources for their own benefit. But it does seem, we spoke to someone in Dakar. We were at the, there's a museum in Dakar. It's one of the first African culture museums that are in Africa, because most of them are in Europe or USA. And the Chinese built one in Dakar. And we were outside, and there was a guy filming a documentary, and he said the Chinese, like, they're different. They trade on our terms. You know, it's a win-win trade. And it was interesting to hear that point of view, because often when you hear about China and business, you very often hear negative aspects. So it's interesting, yeah, to look at how trade can be done differently, and yeah, and whether this kind of trade, it gives more benefits to Africa, whether it's enough, whether it outweighs the negatives, I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to look at. Yeah.
Great. No. So yeah, Jack was saying a little bit about trade, but another point that we came up with was this international trade, split into a few different ways of looking at it, and one that I think was quite big for us when we were doing our studies was a realization about the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and their kind of role in lots of the kind of the situations that are happening now, and the way in which the countries are dealing with things, because the kind of loans that they offered lots of these countries that needed financial support from them were conditional loans. So they would provide a loan on the basis that the country would what's the word? Invest into certain industries, or to sell their company, like their, what's the word? The mines and things like this, and make them private. So privatize, and instead of being like a nationally owned company, it was now privatized. And for lots of countries, this really impacted the economic situation of the natural resources that they had, and that they couldn't quite make the most of what they had. And I think it was quite big for us to realize that, wow, it's the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, they kind of keep lots of countries in a state of poverty, and they kind of create this poverty by putting these conditional loans, and then the countries that are incredibly rich in resources can't quite make up the money from it, which is kind of, a shame. It's quite controlling. Another side of international trade that we were kind of thinking about was the global markets, and the way that the global markets are calling for these precious metals or oils or other commodities and resources. And so the demand for these things is very high, and the countries that can provide them, that can supply to this demand, they're kind of expected to, either from themselves or from other exterior parties. And so as the demand gets higher and higher, they need to produce more and more, but then also there's all the competition from being a global market and being able to sell their resources on this global market. And they don't always have the control of how much their product would cost. And the income from the natural resources is dependent on the market value of it. So it's kind of very much not in the hands of the people who are owning these things. Just going so fast, Jack.
I know it's a lot of information. Like to bring kind of an alternative. Like there is kind of one country which is kind of famous for avoiding the resource curse, and that would be Norway. And I want to talk a little bit about Norway. They discovered oil in 1960, and it's clear that their economic growth is much higher than most industrialized countries, most other industrialized countries. If you compare it to like Sweden, that has a very similar economy apart from the oil. It has a larger growth than Sweden, which just proves that they have benefited from having the oil. And the reason they have a strong belief that resources belong to the nation and that should benefit society as a whole and also future generations. And they have very, very strict regulation and taxation on so that the extraction of oil can be done safely, sustainably, in a profitable way, and that the majority of the revenue, it stays with the state. And Yeah, essentially, Norway has, I think the reason it's avoided the resource curse is because Norway was aware when oil became present in Norway. And it's since then, it's always had a say in what happens with its oil. At first, they invited people in to kind of explore the oil because they didn't have enough experience, but then they developed the experience and more Norwegians were working in the oil in Norway. Um, and it's managed to monitor its policies on taxation to do with the oil prices. So when oil prices are high, the taxation is also high, and vice versa. And it's basically the huge advantage is that it was never colonized. Um, and it's always had stable government throughout, like since the 1960s. It's been a stable government that could choose what it does with its natural resources. Whereas ex-colonized countries who were first introduced to the were not first introduced, but who had countries come in to exploit them for their natural resources, and then continued to do that once they gained independence. They've not really had the chance to build stable governments and to have full control over their natural resources. So yeah, I think Norway has obviously had a huge privilege and an advantage in that, and it's the reason it's avoided that in a way.
Yeah, for sure. We in preparation for this this Zoom, we were doing lots of like research about what other people had to say about this matter, and like I was reading in lots of different places that yeah, a strong civil society can play like such an important role in ensuring effective management of the natural resources. And so it's this kind of management of the resources that is so important in kind of dictating what can be kind of what can be gained from them. And and yeah, but we wanted to say a little bit about these travel countries that we visited, because yeah, lots of this information is stuff that we've learned in our studies, we've done some researching as part of our studies about. But like we did visit 6 different African countries, and all of them, well, in like lots of them we discovered lots of these kind of resources, and not all of them were incredibly resource rich in terms of the global idea of which countries are the richest in resources, but all of them had some kind of resource that we were looking, and in some of them we kind of got to know a bit more information, like in Mauritania, for example. You know, like you learned quite a bit about the kind of the fishing.
Yeah, Mauritania, it's in Nouadhibou in the north. It has a huge fishing port. Also want to say that Asadek is here, which I'm quite excited about, and he's someone that we met in Mauritania. He's got his camera off at the moment, but yeah, I'm happy he's joining. And yeah, but in Mauritania, it's there's a huge fishing port, and they employ a lot of local fishermen. And I was on investigation. I was doing research into the fishing in Mauritania, and and yeah, one of the things that the fishermen said is, yeah, the local fishermen, they do what they can. They have their small boats and they fish in they use like plastic cartons, and they go in and they stay overnight, and they take up like 20, I don't know how many fish at a time, but it was a reasonably small number compared to the large fishing boats that were a little bit further out, but were, from what I remember, it was Russia and Spain were some of the countries that used to come, and they used to fish huge amounts, and they weren't allowed to fish the kind of fish that the locals were fishing. But there's no way that they could differentiate. So that I think it was the octopus that the local fishermen would fish, and then they would, the industrial fishing boats would go for larger fish. And these were, yeah, private companies who would come and just take everything, and then yeah, it wouldn't leave much for the local fishermen, and also it takes away a lot of the resources. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, and in Mauritania as well, they extract a lot of iron ore, and they extract it and then they move it from the inland along to the coast on this incredibly long train, and it's kind of very, very well known in the country, and it's this export. And unfortunately, no one in our team managed to investigate or research into this because it was kind of so far out of the way. But it was kind of, I spoke to quite a few people. I was looking into climate change in Mauritania, and so it kind of had its implications on the climate because of the constant mining of this ore. And in the middle of the Mauritanian desert, between the cities of Nouadhibou and Nouakchott, there is a smaller city where they they mine gold, and so masses of people travel to this city in order to extract the gold, and then they go back to their city, one of the two cities where they're living. And we spoke to one guy, I think, when we were hitchhiking through the desert, and we met him on this bus, and he was explaining to us about the process and how much work goes into it, and how little money that he personally would receive from finding this gold, because of the kind of the politics that are at play within the country. And so, like, this person that we spoke to, he was digging, doing lots of the hard work, and if they found traces of gold, then somebody else would come in from another company that was partly Mauritanian, but they would come in and then they would take the gold and they would receive the benefits of that. And it was very interesting to hear this very political way in which they were dealing with the natural resources. And I think for me, it was interesting because I would never have expected it. Driving through the country, it's it's like desert and sand and like not much, but I think it's incredibly rich in lots of different minerals that they're kind of, that's why they're still there and have this presence within the lands. Do you have something else you want to say about Mauritania?
No, I think we should move to that.
Okay. So now we are going to kind of split you into some breakout groups, where we would like you to discuss some solutions for these countries, thinking about the kind of Norway model, and then the other countries that we've mentioned like briefly, but either other ones that you know about as well, or some discussion, some research about
solutions to the resource curse. What can we do as individuals, as countries, as governments? What can be done to kind of help countries take use of their own resources and benefit from them, as Norway seems to do at the moment? So yeah, we'll split you into, I think that's
3.
Yeah, into 3 different groups, and you'll have 20 minutes, or should we say less?
Yeah. You saying yes to less or more?
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Okay.
So yeah, you'll have 20 minutes to discuss in groups, and if you're struggling or have a bunch of questions, then you can they put it in the group chat, and it will go to the main group chat.
Yeah, they can private message
Okay, you can private message us and we can come in and say hi and help you. Yeah, so I hope that's okay. You have 20 minutes from now.
I don't know from now. This is technology.
Okay, not from now.
Sorry, what are the groups then?
You'll find out, you'll just magically appear in a different group.
Okay. I'm only on my phone, so
You've all been invited.
Yeah.
Oh my God, they're all disappearing. So weird.
No, after he's stuck in traffic, so therefore he cannot.
Can you not?
Okay,
Yeah, he's
Oh, he
gone.
went.
it's gone.
Okay, we can check. Have you seen the breakout?
So, hi. Yeah, so maybe we can start to discuss, and if you have any questions also, you can give, but maybe we can start to discuss about what the governments could do of the countries that own the resources, or not own, that's the point, but actually like the resources are there, but they don't own it.
And I think like for government, for example, and it was mentioned for government and personal individual, and the things that can be interesting to take in consideration is, do we actually have a wish to do something? Now we know there is this situation, but do you want to do something for it? Because if you have the wish to do something, then it's much more easy to find ways and to actually do it, you know, if you know what I mean. If it's just
Definitely.
another issue
Definitely.
and it's just like,
Motivation,
hmm.
right? That's what you meant, no?
Hmm?
Can
It's
you repeat?
like a motivation.
Motivation, yeah.
Yeah,
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 exactly.
totally.
And that's what actually moves things, that there are people who wish to do it.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's difficult in general because, okay, you specifically talked now about Mauritania, but like you also have to look at the different kind of governments in each country and how they rule. And the problem is that, as you also mentioned, Nina, that in a lot of African countries, the government is so unstable still that it is so difficult for the society to involve in any kind of problem. And I think we as European culture could get involved in it and could say, okay, we maybe have an idea or plan for you that you could do it in a better way, but then we as Europeans would get in touch more with like private companies rather than the governments. And that is also difficult as us, like my experience in the African countries is that it's also difficult as a European or also as a person from a completely different background to get the respects of the people that live there to just talk about their issue in that country and how you could challenge them to be better in the future.
I think when you come with an approach of someone who also want to learn from them and so on, you like it. Of course, it also always depend of the people you meet, and it always depend of the ones that crossed your way, you know. But from my experience during this travel, is that when we are really interested in them and when we are really trying to get to know what they
give the poor, dark people some money. I think trade is a better option, but the trade has to be fair trade.
I was thinking like maybe it sound a little bit incredible, but those people, you know, like when there is a trade, like they are, for example, growing something and then they sell it to the companies which sell like elsewhere. In most cases, the company have the bigger income, but what if like the sellers have the knowledge and the support like to be create a own project, like they would be the one who will grow and also the one who would sell those things. Like I know like there is the problem that they don't have contacts and knowledge and those things, but if we find a way how to acknowledge them and how to find sponsors to start those projects, maybe that could be solutions, because all the incomes they will go to them. And I know that in nowadays there are many sites where like really there are millionaires and they leave those contacts and you can write them that you have a project, and if they think your project is good, then they will support you with money, resources or something like this.
Good idea.
Yeah, but like we still need to get rid of the corporations somehow. They're not just gonna, yeah, this is the biggest problem. Like, I don't know. I think this is a much bigger problem than, like, I don't think that they really need so much help with, I don't know, doing their own thing. But first we need to stop exploiting.
Yeah, like you mean like to stop the big companies to have they like their own cells there, or like their own markets here, or you like what do you mean?
Yeah.
It was interesting to get a sense that from the journey that some of the infrastructure that the Chinese is funding is going to be really important for that country to grow itself. So if a country is going to develop economically, it has to have the infrastructure, and so maybe the Chinese investment long term has got the seeds for that individual country to begin to grow itself. Kind of that's what you'd hope as a model. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit optimistic.
So in Wales, we've got an act that came in that's called the Future Generations Act, and everything that gets passed in our government has to look at the future generation, the way that it might impact people and the environment in the future. So even just something as simple as creating an act that potentially means that the governments have to look at what impact it would have on society in 25 years' time might be a helpful way to kind of move forward as well.
Hi, Martina.
Hello.
Hi. At the moment, we have split everybody into some working groups, and they are having some discussions. But they will be back in like 2 minutes. So I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can either wait and then hear everything that they kind of conclude on.
Okay, cool.
That's great. I do not know how.
Hi.
Hi.
She's connecting to audio. Hi, we can't hear you. Still can't hear you. No.
Can you send it? And then I'm going to ask you something.
You're on mute.
Oh,
There we
yes.
go.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's cool. At the moment, everyone's kind of in groups. They're coming back in literally. Francesca is here.
Hola. Ah, okay. Vale, okay. Then I am. Okay, I was watching the mobile phone, and I was watching you. Oh my God, it's 9. No, tu voy. Sí. Hello. Wait.
In breakout groups and broadcast the message to all. You can say
Magic.
We finish. Okay.
just to finish. And then you will say close rooms, and they'll have 1 minute to leave the room and to come back here.
Okay.
Okay,
So we give them
let's
1
give them
minute
1
and-
minute to press it.
Yes, I think that I'm giving up. I'm shitting in my
Okay.
Sorry.
It's just one person. Though.
Okay.
Not everyone.
Sorry, Modena. Yeah, I'm open heart.
Welcome.
You know, an open. Yeah.
Has it been a minute?
No. Yeah, close.
Close all rooms. I'm so bad at clicking things. Whoa. 57 seconds.
Did you announce that there would be, or it was meant to be just a surprise?
What?
That I would speak.
Oh, surprise.
It is a
Okay, so then no, that's a good.
Okay.
Enjoy.
I did bench press and squats today.
That sounds dangerous.
Exactly. I hesitate. Went to the wide. In the circle. People. Hello.
Welcome back.
I also just want to, I think maybe we will conclude in the main group. So somebody could share maybe of the thoughts that you had.
Dun, 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 dun. encanta.
Then Violetta can support.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1.
Oh my God, everyone's coming back. Wow.
Hi.
Welcome back, everybody.
Sorry for interrupting.
I hope that you had some good conversations. And that, yeah, so now our idea was maybe to share some of the thoughts that you came up with in a group. So I don't know if we can have like a spokesperson from each of the groups to kind of share some of the ideas, and then, yeah, we'll kind of round it all up in this way. So how do we do it?
Who wants to start? I can just choose someone at random.
Tell Julian to start.
Julian, start. Where are you? Oh, there you are.
It's not a fair play. So we as a group started to discuss, and we realized that we have to empower the countries from the resources, and we have to do it with creating consciousness in Europe about it, and that the own Europe starts to regulate the way they extract the resources. People from my group, if there's something wrong, just do like this. And we have to put the input in liberal democracies, because they can somehow make a change, starting with a movement from Europe that promotes sanctions to the that they will just trade, if I understood right what Or said, that they will just trade if the conditions from the countries that are like the resources from, they will like get better, like they will have like they will improve their way of living. I don't know if you understand. If somebody doesn't understand, you do like this. And we agree that Africa has to become self-dependent, that it can't depend on other countries. And I think that's a wrap.
Maybe just to expand that a bit, I mean, because the EU, when it wants, it has good negotiating power, like it had with Iran, even though back then it was also with the US. And that means they can say we sanction, or we don't make agreements of trade. And trade agreements are also very great power in this world. So they can say we do trade agreement, new good trade agreement for a country that will promote the citizens' well-being, or well-being is a big word for what's going on there, but maybe we'll have a more fair distribute of the money they get. I mean, that was the idea, and that by that to try to promote the countries to have more like a better standard, or to make a standard and then to tell the country, you ever make this standard, we trade with.
Yeah, any other points from that group, or any comments? No. Otherwise, we'll move to the next group. Andrew?
No, the same group, no?
Was it the same group? Oh, it was the same group. Sorry. Just trying to pick on you now. Christina, do you want to share? You can do it.
Fuck. Yeah, I don't know if I remember. Yeah, I mean, we were talking more, I guess, in of course consciousness awareness. It's like kind of the basic, and spreading the knowledge as you are trying to do is great. We thought about some kind of like fair trade, not just on food. And I mean, I don't know actually what does it consist exactly of right now, but like on, I don't know, electronics and stuff like this that the minerals are going into, and mm, uh, what else? Help me out, somebody from my group. Ellie is coming, yes.
There's a good point, like about ethical consumption and spreading awareness so more people know. Yeah.
Yeah, we also talked about turning the growers into sellers as well, and giving them the training, I suppose, to be able to do that, and the resources to be able to do that, so they can take it on themselves. And then probably the last point was that we were talking about like a main body to be overseeing that there is fair trade happening. And Christina, was it you that said you wanted to hold people to account who were doing things unlawfully, and that actually trials and judgment should be put upon people? So, but yeah, we also talked about just consuming less ourselves, just having an awareness of where these minerals are coming from, and how we as consumers don't over consume.
So my last point just before we came back was to kind of not to like individual, to put the responsibility on the individuals, not the corporations, because they don't really care. They just have to pay a fine. It's like just another expense for them. But if you actually kind of hold accountable the person who's in charge and who's making these decisions, and the person is affected personally, then they will think twice about what they're doing.
Yeah, like I would like to just add something. Like when we were talking about the solutions, how Martin and Sally said, like, yes, we were talking about promoting, and also like when there is the trade, like usually the workers own less than the companies they which they like buy from them and then sell it into another countries. So maybe to stop this, it was the knowledge we were talking about, like to give the knowledge to those people, like to those farmers or workers, about starting like new projects and businesses on their own to ship to another country. So all the goods which they would earn would stay to them. And like I know that this is really difficult because you need lots of money to start something like this, like their own business. But nowadays there are lots of sites where you can find sponsors. So maybe something like this, like they would start their own businesses, so they wouldn't cooperate with the other companies, which in most cases, not always, like steal most of the incomes from them.
Okay. Anyone else from that group or any comments? Then we can.
If I could give a comment.
Yeah.
one of the things I think it's when we talk about how do we finance this, what do you call it, empowering the people, the country, in the people in the countries with the resources. I think it's also good to realize that the wealth of the North, Europe, US, has been built on exploitation of many other countries, and therefore, I personally, I don't think there should be companies or sponsors or campaigns. The countries are directly responsible for the exploitation of the countries, all of the global North, all the European countries, US, and so on. And I agree they should step out from any kind of activities of exploiting, but at the same time, okay, like the resources you have gathered and used, time to kind of, put it back. Because that's I think the reality. Why do we have such extreme richness and extreme poverty? Is because it's built on exploitation model, and the countries, the people, we carry this responsibility of making it balanced or more just. And then I will also maybe like to take the opportunity to promote on Sunday. We'll have the Peace Justice Conference happening, and there we also will talk a lot about the influence of the situation of how the Western world is kind of exploiting a big part of the world, also with wars and conflicts, and what can be done about that. So that's what I wanted to share.
After the third group say is solution, can you explain a bit more about the Chinese win-to-win strategy? How does it do it? After that.
Yeah, okay. I can do that. Yeah, the third group wants to share. Cats.
Yeah, maybe Sari one because you were writing down stuff. But we actually talked about a lot of similar things that were mentioned before, like raising awareness, basically about where the things come from and how they're produced and how did they reach us. Actually, I cannot read your handwriting.
Yeah, it was a bit very similar. We talk also a bit about corruptions, very briefly, how to not support corruptions, and about consumerism and to make conscious decisions. Empower countries about their own resources, and
fair trade.
Yeah, it was basically more or less the same ideas put in different words. I don't know if some of the other girls want to add something that were with us, Chelsea and Celia.
No, I think you pretty much covered it. That was what I was hearing was kind of like the same things that we discussed.
And we had a message from Asadek. What Asadek was saying, leaders should be less materialistic so the capitalism can be defeated.
Yeah, but that's pretty much.
Asadek, do you have anything to say? Can you say? We can't hear you. But okay, never mind. Are there any other comments? Any possible solutions?
What are your possible solutions? Oh no, you go, Kev, sorry.
About from this privatizing perspective, that it's one of the reasons why the countries are not really gaining so much profit from the resources. It's because they're privatized. So yeah, although we know that they have came into this situation through difficulties and kind of they came into a trap, but I think that it could be possible still to nationalize, or somehow if raising awareness could change also the governments and the politics of the governments, how they actually manage the resources, then maybe it could be possible nationalizing.
I think that what we've seen over the last 5 years is a change in structures of organizations. So Uber and Airbnb came from nowhere and now dominate markets with a new delivery model, a new form of production, a new form of ownership. So I think we need to just be imaginative about how we all recognize, I think, that kind of capitalism is in its final stages. It's what emerges from it is whether it's still going to be the elite and the powerful that have got the control, or whether or not the forces amongst us are able to communicate well enough to make the democratic demands, to make the changes from our leaders, because it has to be a political decision. And we know that the kind of the corporations own politics, which is why we need to get new people into politics who can't be owned by the corporations. It's all going to happen in time, and we need to be imaginative about the new ways of organizing our structures to make things happen. And that's products, and that's services, and that's in Europe and all over the world, I think.
Yeah, I agree that it's kind of too much to think about how governments themselves should nationalize, and it's better to think about what we can do. And I think what we can do is educate ourselves, educate others, and consume less and consume ethically, and also to be more politically involved, put pressure on governments to stop investing in and exploiting other countries. And I think that's what we can do as individuals. And just Violetta asked me about China, and I wouldn't say sorry, or you want to say something?
Yes, an idea that we discussed, but I think we lack information, and also we did not develop it that much, but was maybe about creating some power in a specific place. I mean, it won't solve the problem on the largest aspect, but maybe like even if in one village there will be kind of because one of the problems is not that just that the citizens are, many of them are also workers, right? And they have really shitty, really terrible conditions. So I mean, if you solve this a bit, if they will somehow, I don't know if it's possible to have some kind of unions, workers' unions, that will promote some better distribution. Because for now, I guess what happens is like, if we don't take you to the mine. If you don't want, we'll take someone else, and we take a 5-year-old kid or whatever, or whoever will agree to work for $1 a day, and the citizens don't even have time to think about it. So I don't know if it's possible. That's maybe I ask you. It's more a question than an idea. If it's possible to have some kind of unions, or even small-scale unions, that will try to promote better distribution of the wealth.
I think that for sure it's possible, and I think we need to kind of believe that it's possible, and kind of look at the more optimistic side. We kind of joined a couple of the groups, and I heard a couple of like, oh, maybe thinking optimistically, but I think that in order to kind of to brainstorm what these solutions could be, we do need to think optimistically, and do need to kind of look at it this way, because if you see it in like this, then you believe it, and then you get around people, then potentially it could kind of get the ball really going around the world. That's a response to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else?
I'm just thinking, because like
if you really want to have like a good solutions or a good plan, you need to know where you want to get. And I feel like there's no, I don't know, just people don't agree on that. So then it's kind of different. I don't know where I'm going. Yeah.
It's interesting. What do you mean with where you want to get in, and who?
Who?
Yeah, like you say, people. Who are these people, and where do they want to get? I'm not sure I understood exactly, but it sounds interesting.
Like in general, I feel like most people would agree that there is a problem and we need to change the society or whatever, but they wouldn't agree on what the ideal would look like. So then how can you move anywhere if you don't really know where you want to get? And that, yeah, but then it's, I don't know, just, yeah, who it was you who wrote start small, so maybe just focus on a smaller problem where it's easier to find some concepts. Yeah.
Christina, I will try to answer you. I think that's right. The people still don't know where they want to get, but I think there is like a common sorry, I can find a word. Like we all know that this is not right. So I think there's a lot of people that believe that this is not right. So maybe the first step before thinking about where we want to go is thinking about, oh, we don't want to go this way, so let's just not take this way. And maybe after that, some people will realize what they want to do.
Like, yeah, like just it's better to start even when you don't know at the moment where you are going, because you will find it on the way. But if you won't start, like I know it can be difficult, because yeah, when you have the spectacular way where you want to go, it's easier. But if you don't start, that's maybe even worse, because I think the people will support you on the way, and you will find the solutions and the end where you want to go on the way, like something like this. Because when you don't start, how you want to make the difference? So maybe sometimes it's like, like in a sport, maybe sometimes you just need to stop thinking and take a risk.
Okay, unless there's anyone else who has a very important point to make. We are running out of time. I know Violetta, you asked me to talk about China, but maybe you can, well, I'll put my email in, and then maybe you can send me an email or I can message you if you still want to know, or you can Google it because yeah, it's good that you're curious. So I don't know what at is on this.
No, I don't know. But and also, yeah, I've made some notes of everything that you've said, and I will write it up, all of the ideas that you all came up with, and we'll make a post on our Facebook, and maybe share it to DNS if Justas agrees. And so then hopefully, like, all of our ideas and all of your ideas will kind of be spread even further. So yeah, thanks for kind of joining in, and like we've got it's a whole page of ideas that I've written down, so that's super great. I guess Jack's still trying to find the app, but for now, we would like to kind of leave you with, you know, this like a thanks for joining us for one, and like and also kind of, you know, this idea that we've got the ability to have this information, and I think we've also in a very incredible position where we can copying, where we can, you know, we've got this privilege of having the information and being able to do something about it. And I don't know how you feel, but I personally feel like there's a responsibility now of doing something with this information that I've received. And yeah, like I really feel like this, and I hope that kind of you might feel empowered to spread the message further with whoever you speak to. Tell everyone anything and everything, and message Jack because he loves getting emails.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks for joining. I hope you learned something. Share, come to the next events. And yeah.
Yeah, Eustace, he said he was going to give us a piece of paper to share with you, but like every day for the next 30 days or something, we're going to have a course from somebody here at DNS, either a student or a teacher or a guest speaker. And so, yeah, there's going to be like so many different topics for you to get involved in if you're interested. Yeah, so it'd be great to see you again. It's going to be good.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Thank you.